Yet another trillion-dollar unfunded liability. Why California is burning. This is authored by John Rubino via dollarcollapse.com. It's by Tyler Durden on Zero Hedge. The apocalyptic fires that hit California last month have left observers scratching their heads and wondering how destruction on that scale could be possible and how much it will cost in the future if the causes are not addressed immediately. This morning's Wall Street Journal concludes that 1. The problems are not being addressed, and 2. This failure is going to cost a fortune that no government is prepared to cover, emphasis added. Why Californians were drawn towards the fire zones. Building codes, state grants, and low insurance rates have encouraged people to flee expensive cities for their dangerously fire-prone fringes. A November 15 review of Paradise, California shows charred remains of houses among the trees after the Camp Fire burned down more than 11,000 homes. The historical deadly fires that have roared through California this fall, and a string of similarly destructive ones over the past 2 years, are boosting calls to do more to slow climate change. But another underlying problem has contributed to the fire's tragic damage. For decades, California, supposedly the greenest of states, has artificially lowered the cost of encroaching on nature by living in the woods. Permissive building codes, low insurance rates, and soaring taxpayer spending on firefighting and other services have provided an economic framework that has encouraged people to flee the state's increasingly expensive cities for their leafy fringes. The forested exurbs, including places once thought too hilly or too dry to develop safely, have offered comparatively affordable living with jaw-dropping beautiful views. The upshot: more houses have been packed into fire-prone border between civilization and forest, known among planners as Wildland Urban Interface, or WUI, in California than in any other state, more so there. This problem is not restricted to California's woodland. Along the coast, loose building standards and easy federal flood insurance have socialized the cost of building in the path of worsening storms and rising sea levels. It is time, in the parlance of classic economics, to internalize the long externalized cost of building in the trees or by the beach. California, both a bellwether of aggressive environmental policy and a pioneer of suburban sprawl, typifies a problem. For years, CAL FIRE, the state wildfire fighting agency, has been spending increasing sums to put out wildfires, as has the U.S. Forest Service. Already by 2006, according to an audit, most of the money the Forest Service was spending to put out large fires was directly linked to protecting private property in the Wildland Urban Interface, WUI. Meanwhile, at public cost, government has been encouraging more developing by pushing infrastructure, roads, utilities, rescue services, ever farther into the forest. Lax building codes are at the base of the problem. Even in California, which has some of the toughest such rules in the country, because let's remember it's also an earthquake zone, they often are not adequate or adequately enforced. The codes often dictate the use of fire retardant materials in house construction, but typically say nothing about how a development must be situated on the landscape, and that can help determine whether that development will burn in a fire, says Max Moritz, a cooperative extension wildfire specialist at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Quote, so the developers are able to come in, propose something, and often without too much oversight, walk away after having built something in a dangerous place, he says, and we pick up the tab, end quote. In Redding, a city in far northern California, where some neighborhoods were devastated by this summer's massive car fire, city officials have worked in the past with developers navigating the building code to help them save on costs. City manager Barry Tippin says, for instance, Reading let a developer build a subdivision with just one road in and out instead of two under an allowed exception of the code. The one road was wider, but two are generally considered safer in an emergency. Now, he says, officials are reassessing their view of the code and have won a grant to pay for an outside review of their rules. Quote, in the future, we should take a more deliberate and maybe harder stance, he says. Between the year 2000 and 2013, more than 3/4 of all buildings destroyed by fire in California were in the state's WUI, and more were destroyed there than in all the WUI areas across the rest of the continental United States combined, according to a recent study led by Anu Kramer, a researcher at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. That's partly because of increasing construction in the WUI and partly because it is so weakly regulated. Ray Rasker, executive director of Headwaters Economics, a Montana-based nonprofit research firm that specializes in wildfires, notes that rules to protect buildings from fire, for instance, requirements for sprinklers and for regular fire code inspections, tend nationally to be far stricter in urban areas than in the WUI, despite the relative risk. Quote, if you place a home out in the woods in a tinderbox, those rules don't apply, he said. It's backward, end quote. Once a house is built in California's WUI, the state's unusually low insurance rates have the effect of shifting much of the real cost. The average California homeowner pays about $1,000 a year in homeowners insurance, about half the level in Florida or Texas, two other states with markedly rising incidences of natural disasters believed linked to climate change. That is a result of state policy, not an accident. California has an elected state insurance commissioner, one of 11 in the country who are elected, who caps the rates private insurance companies may charge. When insurers seek permission to raise rates to cover catastrophes, state law requires that they average at least 20 years of prior catastrophic loss data, which minimizes the recent dramatic increases in fire damage. Those increases, wildlife specialists warn, suggest things to come. If your response after reading this is, those people are total morons, you're probably in the majority. Using artificially cheap insurance and purposefully taxed building standards to destroy what's left of a unique ecosystem is a crime against nature. And asking taxpayers to cover the resulting catastrophic costs is political suicide. But of course, the politicians, builders, and bureaucrats who created this system will have moseyed off into the sunset with their fortunes intact before the full consequences come crashing down on tomorrow's taxpayers, and the cost of entire future communities consumed by flames to the already gargantuan pile of unfunded pension liabilities that the state has accumulated, then toss in the plunge in tax revenue sure to result from the coming recession and equities bear market, and California might have bumped Illinois from the top of the first state to go bankrupt list. As for why non-Californians should care, we'll just go back a decade ago and note how the federal government, read national taxpayers, had to take on nearly the entire $10 trillion liabilities of the mortgage industry. Bankrupt states will no doubt get similar bailouts when their time comes, which means the dysfunction will eventually find its way into the currency markets. An update on my channel's content. The content of videos that will be placed on my Patreon account will be more diverse, more specific, having to do with subjects that are deeply sourced and researched, such as, for example, what others may be saying concerning the recent California fires and other important facts that we should know. Now, this will not be put on the YouTube channel, but it will be on videos in my Patreon account. For those who are interested, please sign up there. Thank you. Kindly support my Patreon account, since that's the only way I can continue what you like seeing on this channel. Thank you. You'll find it in the description box below.